I am 82 years old. I want you to let that sit for a moment before I say anything else. 82 years on this earth. I have buried a husband. I have buried friends whose names I still say out loud some mornings just to keep them in the air. I have watched my body negotiate with time and lose certain arguments and win others I did not expect to win. I have lived alone. I have lived in community, and I have sat at the bedsides of people I loved in the final chapters of their lives and watched what the end looks like when it is peaceful and what it looks like when it is not. So when I tell you what I am about to tell you today, I am not speaking from a book. I am not speaking from research or theory or the comfortable distance of someone who has not yet arrived at this stage of the road. I am speaking from here, from 87 years of direct experience with what human beings need in order to remain human beings until the very last breath. And what I am going to tell you is this: if the time comes when you can no longer live alone, and for many of us that time does come, please, I am asking you with everything I have earned the right to ask with, do not let the first answer be a care home. Not because care homes are evil, not because the people in them are not trying, but because there is a cost to that decision that nobody puts in the brochure, a cost that is not measured in dollars, and it is a cost that once paid cannot be refunded. Today I am going to tell you what I have seen, what I know, and what I believe with every year of my 87 that you deserve to hear before that decision gets made. Because too often it gets made in a crisis, in a hurry, by exhausted people who love you and do not know what else to do. And a decision made in a crisis by exhausted people is almost never the right decision for the person it most affects. The first thing I need to tell you is that the decision is almost always made too fast and for the wrong reasons. Let me say that again, because it is the foundation of everything that follows. The decision to move an older person out of their home and into a facility is almost universally made at the worst possible moment, in the immediate aftermath of a fall, a diagnosis, a hospital stay, a crisis that frightens everyone and compresses what should be months of careful consideration into days of panicked logistics. And in that compression, in that fear and urgency and exhaustion, the question that gets asked is not, what does this person need to live fully? The question that gets asked is, what is the fastest way to make sure this doesn't happen again? Those are not the same question. And the answer to the second question is almost always a place where someone else is in charge of making sure things don't happen again. A place with rails on the walls and staff who check in, and a dining room at scheduled hours, and a calendar of organized activities, and a door that is always supervised. A place that is safe in the way that a cage is safe. Nothing dangerous can get in, but nothing wild can get out either. I knew a man named George who had a fall in his kitchen at 79. He was alone when it happened, and he was on the floor for several hours before his neighbor, who had a key, came to check on him. He was not seriously hurt, bruised, shaken, frightened, but not broken in any permanent way. But his children were broken by the fear of what could have happened. And within 3 weeks, driven by love and terror in equal measure, they had moved George from the house he had lived in for 41 years into a facility that was clean and well-staffed and entirely without a single thing in it that was his. No garden, no workshop, no window that faced the direction his window had always faced. No sounds at night that he recognized. George told me 6 months later, "I didn't lose my health when I fell. I lost my health when they moved me." He was not being dramatic. He was being accurate. Within a year, George had declined in ways that had nothing to do with his body and everything to do with the amputation of the life he had built. The fall was a crisis. The decision made in the crisis was a second one. Take your time. Breathe. A crisis is the worst possible moment to make a permanent decision. Make the immediate situation safe, and then take the time that the decision deserves. The second thing I need to tell you is what a care home takes that nobody names out loud when they are showing you around the facility. They show you the cleanliness. They show you the safety features and the activity board and the dining room and the staff-to-resident ratio. And all of those things are real, and some of them matter. But here's what they do not show you. They do not show you what happens to a person when they no longer control the hours of their own day. When someone else decides when they wake and when they eat and when the lights go out. When a person who has managed their own life for 80 years must now ask permission for the ordinary movements of an ordinary day. There is a word in my tradition for what a person needs in order to remain a full human being rather than a patient. The word does not translate perfectly, but the closest English carries is sovereignty. The quiet, daily sovereignty over your own body and your own space and your own hours. And it is so ordinary, so completely taken for granted when you have it, that most people do not realize it is what is keeping them alive until the day it is gone. My grandmother lived to 91, and she lived every one of those years in her own home, in her own bed, under her own roof. The last years were not easy. Her body had strong opinions about what it would and would not do. But she woke every morning in the place that was hers, and she made her own tea, and she sat in her own chair, and looked out her own window, and the world she saw from that window was a world she recognized and had chosen. She told me in her final year, "The day I cannot make my own tea is the day something essential in me stops. Not the day I die, the day something essential stops." She understood that sovereignty over the small things, the tea, the chair, the window, the hour of waking, was not a luxury. It was the architecture of selfhood. And a person stripped of that architecture does not simply lose comfort. They lose the daily experience of being themselves. Do not let anyone tell you that safety is more important than selfhood. A person kept perfectly safe inside a life they did not choose is not a person who has been protected. They are a person who has been erased slowly and with the best of intentions. The third thing I need to tell you is about what I call the drift. It is the thing that happens to people in care settings that families often do not see because they visit on Sundays and on birthdays, and the person they love presents their best self for those hours, and then the family drives home reassured. The drift is what happens in between. It is the slow, quiet recession of a person from the life of their own mind. The conversations that grow shorter, not because there is less to say, but because there is less and less that feels worth saying. The interests that narrow because there is nothing in the environment to feed them. The opinions that soften and then disappear because there is nobody asking for them, and expressing a strong opinion in a care setting can make you difficult, and difficult is not rewarded. The self that was once specific, particular, opinionated, curious, difficult in the best sense, begins to smooth out and become general. And what is left is pleasant and cooperative and heartbreaking. I knew a woman named Edna who was, before her family moved her at 82 into a facility, one of the most specific people I had ever encountered. She had opinions about everything: the correct way to make bread, the inferior quality of modern furniture, the precise emotional register of particular pieces of music. She argued, she pushed back, she contradicted. She was alive in the way that only people who are fully themselves manage to be alive. 2 years after the move, I visited Edna, and she was clean and cared for and fed and safe. And she was gone. Not from the room, from behind her own eyes. The opinions had smoothed away. The arguments had stopped. She agreed with everything I said, pleasantly, without friction, the way water agrees with whatever shape you pour it into. She had been cared for into disappearance. And the family said she seemed happy. And perhaps something in her was. But Edna, the Edna who had argued with me about bread for 15 years, was not in that room anymore. The body was. The self had drifted. Fight for the conditions that keep a person specific. Specific people make difficult residents and magnificent human beings. Before I share the next teaching, one important thing. Everything I am pulling from these 87 years, the lessons about dignity and sovereignty and the things that keep a person fully alive in their final chapter, I have written it all down. 20 teachings, 4 parts, in the order they were meant to be received. It is called The Native Way. The link is in the description of this video. But stay right here, because what I am about to share next is the part that people tell me they needed to hear before the crisis arrived, and not after. The fourth thing I need to tell you is that there are more options between living alone and a care home than anyone tells you about. And those options are almost never presented to families because the people who stand to benefit financially from the care home decision are the ones running the conversation. So let me run it instead. The first option is what my tradition has always called the obvious answer, which is that the old do not live apart from the young. I did not grow up in a world where elderly people were housed separately from their families in dedicated facilities, the way we store furniture we are not currently using. The old lived inside the life of the family, not as burdens, as the people the family was built around. They had a room, they had a role, they had a presence that was central rather than supplementary. And yes, this requires sacrifice from the family. Yes, it requires space and patience and adjustment. But it also returns something to the family that the modern world has systematically removed from it. The daily presence of someone who has lived long enough to have perspective, the grounding weight of a person who remembers where the family came from, the specific comfort of a child who still has a grandparent in the house when they go to sleep at night. This is not a sentimental argument. It is a practical one. Families that include their elders are not diminished by the inclusion. They are completed by it. The second option is what some communities are now calling co-housing, and what my grandmother's generation simply called living among your people. Small groups of older adults sharing a home or neighboring homes, splitting the costs and the responsibilities and the company, maintaining their independence while having the daily presence of others who understand their stage of life. Not a facility, not a managed environment, a home with people in it, chosen deliberately. I knew 4 women in their late 70s who did exactly this after their husbands had passed and their children had dispersed. They bought a house together. They divided the rooms and the bills and the cooking and the garden. They argued about the thermostat and the television and the correct way to organize a pantry. And they were more alive than any of them had been in years of solitary widowhood. One of them told me, "I have not been this annoyed at anyone since my husband was alive, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment." They gave each other what a care home could never purchase: genuine relationship, genuine friction, genuine life. The third option is simply the one that requires the most imagination and the most willingness from a family to invest before the crisis rather than after it. Modify the home. Bring in help for the specific things that have become difficult. Hire a person to come in the mornings and evenings. Ask a neighbor, formally and with payment, to be a point of contact. Install what needs to be installed. Remove what creates risk. Make the existing home safe enough for the person to stay in it, because the cost of those modifications, in both money and dignity, is almost always lower than the cost of what replaces it. The fifth thing, and I have saved this one for last, because it is the one that requires the most courage of everyone involved, is this: have the conversation before the crisis forces it. Not after the fall, not after the diagnosis. Now. While the person is well enough to participate in the decision about their own life. While there is time to think rather than react. While the options are still options, and not just whatever can be arranged fastest. The reason this conversation almost never happens is that everyone is afraid of it. The older person is afraid that having it means they are closer to the end than they want to admit. The family is afraid that raising the subject will upset or offend or frighten the person they love. So the conversation waits. And while it waits, the crisis that will eventually force it is quietly preparing itself. And when it arrives, the decision will be made by the wrong people in the wrong state of mind, with too little time and too little knowledge of what the person they love actually wants. Because nobody ever asked. I asked my children, all 4 of them, to sit with me 10 years ago when I was 77 and still fully myself in every way that mattered. And I told them exactly what I wanted if I could no longer manage alone. I told them what I was willing to accept and what I was not. I told them that I wanted to remain in a place that felt like mine. I told them the things that mattered most to me and the things that mattered least. I told them that I understood there would be limits, and I told them which limits I could live with and which would feel to me like a kind of dying before the dying. And they listened, and they were uncomfortable, and we cried a little. And then it was done. And the conversation did not bring the crisis closer. It prepared us all for it. They know what I want. I know that they know. And when the time comes, if the time comes, the decision will not be made by exhausted strangers in a hallway. It will be made by people who love me and were trusted with the exact shape of what love requires in this particular situation. That is what I want for you. Not a perfect outcome, not a guarantee that everything will be easy. Just the dignity of being the author of your own final chapter, rather than a character in someone else's version of it. 87 years have taught me that dignity is not given. It is built. Built in small, daily choices and large, courageous conversations, and the refusal to let fear make the decisions that love should be making. You have earned the right to decide what your life looks like. All of it, including this part, especially this part. If what you heard today stayed with you, the book is there. The Native Way, 20 teachings, 100 pages, written the way I would speak to you if we were sitting together in the kind of honest quiet that only arrives late in life, when the performance finally stops. The link is in the description. Read one chapter. Sit with it. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, has this decision touched your family yet? And what do you wish someone had said to you before it did? I read every comment, and if this is the kind of conversation you have been looking for, subscribe to this channel. We are not collecting viewers here. We are collecting people who remember. Come back next week. I am not done teaching.